Hello everyone. My name is Lei Chen Mo Yi. The last two characters are my Chinese pen name, meaning, guess what? No translation. I'm the translator of Lin Shuhua's short story Once Upon a Time in the anthology Virginia's Sisters. Shuhua was 18 years younger than Virginia and a remarkable writer and artist in Chinese women's literary history. They were connected through Julian Bell, Virginia's nephew. Julian was a visiting professor in Wuhan University, where Shuhua's husband was Dean of Arts. Shuhua loved Julian and had an affair with him. She was heartbroken when Julian died later in the Spanish Civil War in 1937. In the following 2 years, Shuhua and Virginia exchanged letters, sharing their sorrows and connecting as writers and women struggling during a time of world wars. These letters introduced Shuhua as a new part of the Bloomsbury constellation of writers and artists. Shuhua's writings are remarkable as she dared to express female sensibilities at a time when most Chinese girls were still forced to have their feet bound. Her stories are riddled with psychological portrayals and detailed descriptions of the domestic life scenes. Such realism endows household objects with explosive meaning and makes her writing subversive. The subversive note is what I admire in Shuhua's works. Once Upon a Time strikes such a note. Featuring the romantic relationship between two university girls, the story subverts heterosexual normality. It represents a progressive imagination that liberates women from their gender roles and essentially makes Shuhua Virginia's sister.
Hi, so my name is Slava Fabish, and I translated the story by Carmen de Burgos called The Russian Princess. And Carmen de Burgos was this really fascinating figure in Spain, and she married this guy who turned out to be a drunk, and she separated from him, which was this scandal. She moved to Madrid without any help from her family, and first she became a teacher, then she became the first woman in Spain to have her own column in a newspaper. And then she also became the first female war correspondent in Spain, so there were a lot of firsts with her. She was an activist. She had a ton of different issues that she supported. Her first major campaign was to legalize divorce, and she kind of made her name for herself that way. She was kind of scandalous. She became known as La Divorciadora. So it was like as if she was going around telling everybody, you need to get divorced right now. So she used her platform as a journalist and for her activism. But then she also wrote a ton of fiction. She wrote 12 novels, and she wrote a ton of these novelettes. So it was called kiosk literature, and it was a very popular form. It came in these little pamphlets, and they were very inexpensive. Anyway, so The Russian Princess was one of these stories. I think it's a really funny story. It's based on the fact that there were these rumors going around that Anastasia, the Romanov daughter, that she was still alive, or that she was somewhere in hiding. So the story is about this really outlandish character, and Carmen de Burgos kind of makes fun of her, but she also there's a twist. So when she died, after she died, there was the Civil War and the fascists won, and basically all of her work was banned, and her work was destroyed, and she kind of fell into obscurity for a little while. But then in the 80s, they really started going back to her work. So they're slowly kind of resuscitating the history. I hope you enjoy it.
Fani Popova Mutafova was a Bulgarian writer and translator from Italian. She is most famous for her historical fiction, and in the end of the 1920s, she was a part of the circle of Bulgarian modernist writers. Her translations include works by Grazia Deledda, Pirandello, and Giovanni Verga. She is the winner of numerous national literary awards, and in 1937, she was recognized by the Bulgarian Academy of Science as the first woman successfully working in the field of the historical novel and short story. The short story I translated was published in 1936 and was part of a cycle of short stories on the topic of the modern woman. I chose it because it struck me how horribly relevant it was almost 100 years later.
Lvova, or as we knew her, Dorka, was born in 1906. Like many of her contemporaries, including my father, he was strongly committed to an ideology that preached social justice and equality, Dorka looked to make that vision a reality. On her arrival in 1929, Dorka joined a group of pioneer settlers, including my parents, who were training prior to setting up a kibbutz that would become their home. Dorka's emotional expressions and clarity of thought drew me to her story and helped me understand more fully the early years on the kibbutz, where I was born in 1947.
Hello, I'm Hanna Lelyv, a translator working between Ukrainian and English. I translated a short story titled Broken by modernist Ukrainian writer and social activist Natalia Kubrinska. She was born in 1851 in a small town in the west of Ukraine in what was then Austro-Hungarian Empire. Her father was a priest, later elected to Austrian parliament. Kubrinska could speak several foreign languages, and she was well connected in the cultural circles and was passionate about education and women's rights. Kubrinska was also a member of a delegation that lobbied the Ministry of Education to allow women to attend universities. She advocated universal suffrage and access to daycare. Kubrinska was politically active, and during the First World War, she almost ended up in an Austrian concentration camp for her patriotic stance. When it comes to literary legacy, Kubrinska is most well known for her novellas and short stories, especially her short story collection, The Spirit of the Times. This collection also includes the story I chose for this anthology, Broken. There is a particular reason behind my choice. So, the story was written back in 1916, but unfortunately it still resonates with the most recent events in Ukraine, where the atrocious war, launched by Russia, is still raging. In this story, the writer shows the personal tragedy of a young family against the backdrop of the collective misery caused by war, in their case, the First World War. We follow the young couple, Malanka and Lukun, from the moment they meet and fall in love, and up to the dark times when Lukun is drafted and Malanka stays at home in their village, taking care of their children, until the war knocks on their door. Kubrinska is a real master of suspenseful, very realistic, emotional narration. I'm also glad that this story is now coming out in English, giving the chance for the foreign readers to discover yet another Ukrainian voice.
Hi, my name is Nina Kosman. I will read some of my Tsvetaeva translations today, one of Russia's greatest poets. You, rushing past on your streets, to some dubious magic you've tasted. If only you knew how much heat, how much lifeblood I've already wasted, how much heroic passion I threw at a random shadow or rustling, how each time my heart flamed anew and spent its powder for nothing. Oh, trains flying into the night, making off with the sleep of the station. But I know nevertheless that you might never answer, if you heard it, the question, why are my words so strong and so sharp to my cigarette's perpetual smolder? How much gloom and imperiling dark in the light-haired hand on my shoulders.
Hello everyone, happy Dalloway Day. My name is Dalia Wolfson and I translated Yenta Serdatzky's Unheard, Nicht ausgerät sich, from Yiddish into English, and I'm very honored to have it appearing alongside such illustrious translators and authors in the Virginia Sisters anthology. Mazel tov, everyone. A little bit about the author. Yenta Serdatzky was born in 1877 near present-day Kaunas, Lithuania, and left to Warsaw to pursue both her writing and revolutionary activism. In 1906, she emigrated to the US, where she lived first in Chicago and then in New York. She wrote short stories, plays, essays for the major Yiddish periodicals of the day, and at one point had a weekly column in the biggest Yiddish newspaper. One essayist recalled her as the Queen of Union Square. I first came across Serdatzky's writing when I began my PhD program in a class on the Yiddish short story, and I was captivated by her often vicious and feminist tongue, which stood out as nothing like the writers I'd read before in terms of her topics and the subjectivities of her characters, who are often women at different stages of life. So strange was this woman in the company of the boys' club that they came up with a new name for her, the Bacherte, roughly translated as the Bachelorette. At the same time, she was also well within the league of more well-known Yiddish male writers in terms of her craft and style. Serdatzky's stories could range from a sarcastic, biting satire to impressionistic, light-touch, delicate sketches. And it was this variety that also intrigued me. I took on a project of translating her short stories through the Yiddish Book Center Translation Fellowship, and I've had a deeply rewarding time bringing her to English readers.
Hi, I'm Rose Damaris, and I'm a poet in Brooklyn, New York. I have a translation in Virginia's Sisters of a poem by a writer named May Ziadeh. May was a Lebanese-Palestinian writer who was born in 1886. She was born in Nazareth in Palestine, educated in Lebanon, and at the age of about 21 or 22, she emigrated to Cairo, Egypt, and that journey is described in the poem that's in this book. She was a passionate, outspoken advocate for the emancipation and education of Arab women and girls, and she herself was a very unusual woman for her time because she was highly educated with a college degree, and she wrote and published so much. She wrote in multiple genres, one of which was poetry, and her debut book was a collection of poems. It came out in 1911 called Fleurs de Rêve, or Dream Flowers. And that is the work that I'm presently engaged in translating. I find it very exciting, inspiring, and fulfilling because May, as a poet, was so feverishly imaginative, beautifully musical. She wrote these poems in French, one of the many languages that she knew. And like pretty much all of the other work that she wrote and published, they have not yet been brought into English. So I hope I might play some small part in introducing May Ziadeh, her great mind, and her wonderful art to a new audience.
Hi, I'm Juliette Neal. I'm a translator from the Italian and the Sicilian, and I translated the story Coming Home by Maria Messina. I first came across Messina when I was working on a project on Sicilian writers of the 20th century, and fell in love with her. She was a student of Giovanni Verga's, who's a kind of important figure in Italian and Sicilian literary history. And she was published during her lifetime, her stories and her novels, but she died in relative obscurity in 1944. And it wasn't until the 80s that she was sort of rediscovered. And since then, she's enjoyed a lot more recognition. Her stories draw me, I think, mostly because of this drastic sense of realism that she conveys, that she then punctuates with more high-stakes emotion and the language of that high-stakes emotion, and the contrast is really powerful. Most of her stories feature female protagonists in situations of forced passivity, is what I think I would call it, boredom, societal limits, and feature women who would really like to be able to be making choices about their lives, but cannot. Coming Home is no exception to that. It's really remarkable how Messina conveys this kind of limbo state, this desire for agency that just is never fulfilled. The original title is Casa Paterna, and a more literal translation might have been Her Father's House or My Father's House. But I chose to translated as Coming Home to emphasize that limbo state, the fact that she doesn't ever arrive at a home, or is never able to make her own home either. That's not an option for her.